Hello, I'm Tom Davis, Partnership Leader for Health and Nutrition for World Vision International, and this is a presentation on faith leaders and COVID-19 vaccine acceptance. We can and should be doing more to mobilize faith leaders in this fight against COVID-19. In this document, WHO has stated that religious leaders of faith-based organizations and communities of faith can share health information to protect their own members and wider communities, which may be more likely to be accepted than from other sources. In this USAID landscape document, they mention that religious factors are the third most frequently cited reason for vaccine hesitancy globally and influential in immunization uptake. However, to mobilize faith leaders, we need to understand the drivers of that decision to get vaccinated with the COVID-19 vaccine by people of faith and why some faith leaders choose to promote COVID-19 vaccines amongst the religious communities they serve and others do not. One formative research tool that we're using in World Vision for gaining that understanding, which I developed back in 1990, is the barrier analysis method. BA is a rapid assessment formative research tool to identify the behavioral determinants associated with a particular behavior, such as regular mask use, vaccine acceptance, or child marriage. We do these studies in order to develop more effective behavior change messages and activities. And a key feature of barrier analysis is that you interview those doing a behavior or intending to do a behavior, the doers or acceptors, and compare their responses to those who are not, the non-doers or non-acceptors. This allows you to look for correlations between responses and the behavior that you want to promote so that you can better identify what is driving behavioral adoption. BA has been used in more than 40% of all low and middle income countries now. It was used extensively during the Ebola outbreak. It's been used for promoting polio vaccines. And World Vision is now using it to study acceptance of COVID-19 vaccines. At the bottom of this slide, you will see the main determinants that are explored in these BA studies. Things like perceived social norms, whether you think that people important to you approve of the behavior, but also divine will, whether you believe that God wants you to do a behavior or not, and beliefs about God's will. We have conducted BA studies with a lot of different groups, such as with faith leaders, adults, adolescents, community health workers, health facility workers, college students, and NGO staff. And we've conducted these studies in about a dozen countries so far, with another dozen or so on the way. So there are a lot of findings from these studies with adults, but let's hone in on the results concerning faith. In these graphs, the green bars show the percentage of vaccine acceptors, not faith leaders, but of all the adults interviewed, those that plan to get a COVID-19 vaccine when it's available to them. And the red bars represent the non-acceptors, those adults who do not plan to get a COVID-19 vaccine when it is available to them, or they aren't sure they will. And here's what we found using the BA questions on faith and faith leaders in Myanmar, Dhaka, and Tanzania. For example, in Myanmar, we found that vaccine acceptors were 2.8 times more likely to say that God approves of them getting a COVID-19 vaccine, and 1.3 times more likely to say that they had a very high level of trust in the COVID-19 vaccine information provided by religious leaders. We asked whether respondents agreed or disagreed with the statement, "Whether or not I get COVID-19 is purely a matter of God's will or chance. The actions I take will have little bearing on whether or not I get COVID-19. And in Dhaka, and these studies were led by a colleague, Kalam Abul, we found that acceptors were 1.2 times more likely to disagree a lot with that statement. That is, to believe that what they did made a difference. Acceptors were also 1.3 times more likely to say that most of their community and faith leaders would want them to get a COVID-19 vaccine. And I'll put up some of these Tanzania results as well, but due to time limitations, we won't be discussing those today. We also found similar but not identical findings in Bangladesh, India, and Kenya when using the BA questions on faith and faith leaders. This table shows which determinants of COVID-19 vaccine acceptance were found to be important in the first 6 countries where we used the tool. We have a publication in process on these results and a preprint available. Note that perceived divine will, whether or not you think that God approves of your getting a vaccine, was an important determinant in all 6 countries. And in 2, rural Bangladesh and Kenya, it was highly associated with the decision to get a vaccine. Also note that while I will be focusing on a couple of these determinants, faith leaders really can message on all of these determinants. They can ensure that people are getting accurate information, help to establish a social norm, and be a model for others. So for the example, perceived susceptibility. This is whether or not someone believes that they're likely to get the disease or problem or not, in this case COVID-19. And when that's low, when people think they're not at risk of getting COVID-19, they're of course usually less likely to want the vaccine. Faith leaders can help change that. In countries where we find that non-acceptors are more likely to have low perceived susceptibility, faith leaders can talk with their congregations about how anyone can get COVID-19 and that we all need to take precautions. And so in Christian contexts, using Luke 13:4, where Jesus talks about the Tower of Siloam tragedy, could be useful. Now let's talk about one of the barrier analysis studies in the DRC where we focused on faith leaders and where the behavior that we were promoting is COVID-19 vaccines by faith leaders in the religious communities they serve and their congregations. So we want to see if these faith leaders are promoting COVID-19 vaccines, and if not, why do some promote it and others do not? In that DRC study, we found that about 59% of faith leaders were promoting vaccines in the religious communities that they served. And with barrier analysis, at least when we upload all the data using Kobo, we can look at the estimated percentage of all people in the group, like faith leaders, who believe certain things. But we don't find this sort of information to be all that useful. And here's why. Let's look at one of the top responses. When we ask faith leaders if they know of any religious texts or teachings that support encouraging people of faith in their religious community to get a vaccine, 77% said no. They do not know of such texts or teaching. However, when we look at the faith leaders who are promoting vaccines and compare their response with those who are not, there's no association. The second smaller graph shows that there are actually more faith leaders promoting vaccines who said no to that question than faith leaders who are not promoting vaccines. But that difference isn't significant. So it's not driving the behavior. Now, it may help to provide them with those religious texts, but it's not what is making a difference right now on whether or not they're promoting vaccines among their faith communities. So what does make a difference as to whether faith leaders are promoting COVID-19 vaccines or not? Here are the main things that we found might be driving that behavior in the DRC. Like in many behavioral studies, social norms matter. Faith leaders who believe that about half of faith leaders are encouraging or will soon encourage people to get COVID-19 vaccines were much more likely to be doing so now. In fact, they were about 1.8 times more likely to be promoting COVID-19 vaccines. Similarly, faith leaders who believe that most of their close family and friends would want them to encourage people of faith to get a vaccine were also much more likely to be promoting COVID-19 vaccines, almost twice as likely, in fact. Doers, those promoting vaccines, were twice as likely to say that they would promote vaccines if a doctor or nurse recommended that they do so than non-doers. So that's an example of a very actionable finding. We need to have medical folks reaching out to faith leaders about vaccines, discussing vaccines with them, and making the ask that they promote COVID-19 vaccines among their faith community. But social norms are not the only driver here. Faith leaders who believe that it's very likely that someone in the religious community that they serve will get COVID-19 over the next 3 months were much more likely to be promoting COVID-19 vaccines as well, about 1.6 times more likely. Faith leaders in the DRC who promote vaccines are also twice as likely to believe that the vaccines work, to trust COVID vaccines a lot, and to believe that God or Allah approves of people getting COVID-19 vaccines. So don't worry about the details on this slide. I just wanted to mention here that once you have done this sort of BA study, which often only takes a few days, you can then develop both messages and activities to promote the behavior, such as getting a COVID-19 vaccine or promoting COVID-19 vaccines in churches and other faith settings, using a mask, a lot of different behaviors. For example, note the example of perceived social norms. Since vaccine acceptance and getting vaccinated is largely an invisible behavior, in Sierra Leone, we recommended that people who plan to get the vaccine or have gotten one wear a ribbon, a pin, or a sticker. So it will increase the perception that most people plan to get the vaccine. People will be seeing these sort of ribbons everywhere. They can also publicize the fact that 3/4 of adults in Sierra Leone plan to get a vaccine, leveraging that descriptive social norm. These were the recommendations that we sent to the Ministry of Health, or some of them at least. Here are a few additional ways that organizations can influence perceived divine will, which is one of the determinants studied in barrier analysis. We have a COVID-19 vaccine module for the Channels of Hope model. World Vision, MTI, and other organizations have been using this Channels of Hope model. Sermon guides can be useful. Having faith leaders promoting vaccines in community meetings, of course, and also using mass and social media for that purpose. World Vision is using the information from these studies, and you can too, in presentations too, and interactions with COVAX, UNICEF, Gavi, the Vaccine Confidence Project, Core Group, CCIH, and others. We have also used that data to write thought leadership pieces and publish results in the peer-reviewed literature and as preprints as well. You can click on these two images below when you have the slides to see those studies. I've included the links here for the barrier analysis tools, and lastly, a link where you can take the survey yourself, the barrier analysis survey, just for fun. If you would like to use these barrier analysis tools to better understand a population you're working with, including your own staff, feel free to reach out to me. I can answer some additional questions you might have, and I can link you up with technical people who can help you to do a study if you're interested. Thank you very much.